Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty massive. The smash hit 2026 biopic, Michael. I mean, this film has literally dominated pop culture lately, right? It gives us this huge, sweeping, cinematic version of the king of pop's life. But as we so often see with these giant Hollywood productions, the polished story on screen doesn't always line up with the messy, complex historical reality. So in this explainer, we're going to peel back that glossy Hollywood myth. We'll use actual historical data to uncover the complex realities that were left on the cutting room floor. All right, let's get into it.
First up, we've got to talk about the sheer scale of this movie's impact. Michael pulled in a staggering $217 million globally in its opening weekend alone. To put that in perspective, that is an undeniable, record-breaking commercial success. People are absolutely flocking to theaters to watch this story unfold, which really proves that Michael Jackson's cultural footprint is just as massive today as it ever was. But alongside those huge ticket sales, well, there's been a wave of intense scrutiny.
And that brings us to the fierce critical pushback surrounding the film. This really kicked off with documentary filmmaker Dan Reed. You might know him as the director of 2019's Leaving Neverland. He delivered this incredibly scathing critique, straight up saying the film fundamentally flips the truth, recast allegations as lies, and entirely sidesteps the most serious accusations against Jackson. So for critics like Reed, the film is basically operating as a highly sanitized piece of PR and image management.
But then, on the flip side of this intensely polarized debate, we have the film's director, Antoine Fuqua. Fuqua has publicly cast doubt on the motives of Jackson's accusers, suggesting that sometimes people do some nasty things for some money. So right out of the gate here, we're looking at a film that's operating as way more than just Friday night entertainment. It's really become a battleground over a deeply contested historical legacy.
Section 1. Rewriting Pop Music History.
So the movie gives us this deeply satisfying, dramatic moment where Michael decisively fires his domineering father, Joe Jackson, via a single fax in 1981. Boom, done. But the historical record? Well, it shows a much messier, multi-year separation. It definitely wasn't just one fax. It was actually the gradual hiring of outside managers, bringing in top entertainment lawyers like John Branca, and a long, drawn-out distancing that didn't finally culminate until around 1984.
This kind of historical rewriting also feeds right into that classic Hollywood trope of the solitary genius. You know the scene. The movie shows Michael having the solo light bulb moment for Thriller while watching a horror movie marathon. It makes for a great visual, for sure, but it completely erases the massive team effort behind that iconic track. Actually, the song was originally titled Starlight and was written entirely by British songwriter Rod Temperton. Temperton is the one who came up with the title Thriller in a hotel room. Add in legendary producer Quincy Jones, who was absolutely instrumental in shaping the final sound, and you've got a masterclass in collaboration, not just a lone genius sitting there with a notepad.
We also see timelines getting squeezed together for dramatic effect. The movie frames the battle to get Michael on MTV as this final epic hurdle after the Thriller video was made. But if we look at the actual timeline, MTV debuted in 1981. By March of 1983, the network had already caved to record label pressure and put Billie Jean into heavy rotation, breaking the network's color barrier in the process. The famous Thriller short film wasn't even shot until October of '83. So Michael was already the undisputed face of MTV long before a single drop of zombie makeup was ever applied.
The film also misses a pretty powerful visual metaphor regarding the famous fairy tale Tudor mansion at Havenhurst. Now, the movie shows the family moving into it way back in 1971. But here's the thing, that house didn't even exist in 1971. They moved into a standard mid-century modern home. It wasn't until the 1980s, when Michael had become the ultimate financial linchpin of the entire family, that he bought the property, demolished his father's house, and built that Disney-inspired Tudor mansion himself. It was a massive power move. It symbolized his total financial independence and control, which the film just completely glosses over by placing the house in the wrong decade.
Section 2. Scars, Skin, and Reality.
Okay, now we really need to medically ground one of the most heavily sensationalized topics in pop culture history, Michael's changing skin tone. The autopsy report confirmed unequivocally that he suffered from vitiligo. This is a genetic, pigment-depleting skin condition that causes pale patches to appear on the body. It is a very real, very disfiguring disease that deeply, deeply affected both his physical appearance and his mental health.
Walking through the actual timeline of how he managed the disease reveals a lot. Back in the early 1980s, he used dark makeup to cover up the pale blotches. But as we get into the late 1980s, his skin appeared noticeably lighter on stage. The real turning point came in 1991. The vitiligo had become so advanced that he began using powerful FDA-approved depigmentation creams, specifically one called Benequin. The result of this was the permanent destruction of his remaining melanocytes just to achieve a single, even, pale tone. So it was a medical treatment for a severe condition, but man, it sparked a massive, painful public controversy regarding his racial identity.
The film also really oversimplifies his changing facial features. It explains his first plastic surgery purely as a medical necessity for his sinuses. But the historical reality is, well, it's far more psychologically layered. Jackson stated repeatedly that during his childhood, his father Joe and his brothers heavily mocked his appearance, frequently calling him Big Nose. So, those surgeries were in large part an attempt to escape that painful childhood mockery and to physically distance himself from the image of the child star he used to be.
And this physical toll is further complicated by the infamous 1984 Pepsi commercial accident. Now, the movie authentically recreates that horrifying moment when a pyrotechnic explosion caught his hair on fire, which resulted in second and third-degree burns to his scalp. But while the film shows the fire, it just stops right there. It completely ignores the tragic reality of the aftermath. Those agonizing scalp surgeries that followed sparked a lifelong, devastating dependency on prescription painkillers that would literally plague him for the rest of his life.
Section 3. The Missing Dark Chapters.
Picture this. Audiences leave the theater after a triumphant, cheering 1988 concert scene that marks the end of the Victory Tour. And then, the screen just goes to black. The story simply stops. It entirely, almost jarringly, avoids the tumultuous 1990s and the 2000s.
Which leads us to the big, central question of this explainer. Why? Why does the world's most anticipated biopic, a movie that spans over 2 hours detailing his childhood and his massive rise to fame, suddenly hit the brakes in 1988? Like, what exactly forced the filmmakers to cut the story short and completely erase the heavily publicized controversies of 1993 and beyond?
Section 4. A legally mandated ending.
To understand this, we have to look at the facts. In 1993, 13-year-old Jordan Chandler accused Michael Jackson of abuse. This triggered a massive police investigation and a highly publicized raid on the Neverland Ranch. Ultimately, no criminal charges were filed in this case. Then, in 1994, Jackson paid a reported $25 million out-of-court civil settlement to the Chandler family. Those are the historical events that really define that era of his life.
But here is the wild, behind-the-scenes production secret. The movie actually tried to tell this part of the story. The original screenplay included the 1993 allegations, and director Antoine Fuqua literally shot scenes depicting the intense police raid on Neverland. But late in the game, during production, a massive legal hurdle popped up. It forced the studio to cut those scenes, completely rewrite the ending, and undergo some incredibly expensive reshoots.
And the legal reality forcing those reshoots? It's right here. That 1994 settlement contained a strict confidentiality clause prohibiting either party from publicly communicating about the events. Because the Jackson estate is directly involved in producing this film, that non-disclosure agreement legally blocked the filmmakers from depicting the Chandler family, the allegations, or the settlement on screen. Basically, their hands were completely tied by a 30-year-old legal document.
So this really brings our core thesis into focus. The movie you see in the theater is actually the product of two incredibly powerful forces colliding. On one side, you've got the glossy Hollywood myth, that natural desire to streamline history, amplify the genius, and celebrate the music of a global icon. But on the exact opposite side, you have a legally bound reality, where the darkest and most controversial chapters of a subject's life are literally walled off by courtroom settlements.
It's fascinating, right? When we watch biographical films, we expect the truth, or at least, a version of it. But how can we ever fully understand a deeply complex historical figure when their most challenging, defining, and controversial chapters are legally locked away from the narrative? It really makes you pause and question what we're actually consuming when Hollywood tells a true story. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.